So it's been 1 year since the release of Marvel's Spider-Man 2, the sequel to the smash hit Spider-Man game from Insomniac in 2018. A game that was going to combine not only Peter Parker's Spider-Man but Miles Morales' Spider-Man, and bring together a sequel that was just bigger, bolder, and better than its predecessor. Well, I think it's fair to say that while Spider-Man 2 without a doubt went bigger and bolder than its predecessor, it didn't necessarily do it better. Now, I made a video on this game not long after it released nearly a year ago, and it just so happens that that was actually the first video I had ever uploaded on this channel, but a lot has changed since then. This game seems to have drawn a ton of negativity post-launch, leading people to believe that this game sucks, and that it doesn't even come close to the first. But to counter that, there are people still praising it as a masterful sequel that did everything a sequel should. Personally, I've always been in the mindset that Spider-Man 2 had higher highs and lower lows compared to the first game, and playing the game again 1 year on from launch, there were a few things that did surprise me. So in this video, we're going to take a deep dive look into Marvel's Spider-Man 2, the world, the gameplay, and the story to try and figure out if this was the ultimate sequel or if it fell as flat as subsections of the internet insist. Just before we do though, I just want to let you guys know that I have started a Discord for the channel as well as my other channels too, where you guys can come together, suggest video ideas, and get more involved with the channel. I will also have my Instagram linked below, so you can get more of a behind the scenes look on how this channel runs. But shameless plugs aside, let's get into Spider-Man 2. When we learned there was going to be a sequel to not only 2018's Spider-Man, but 2020's Miles Morales spin-off that was going to have both Spider-Men working together, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we were all absolutely hyped. Throw in the fact that Venom was going to be the main antagonist of the game, at least so we thought, and you seemingly just had a recipe for success. After all this game really had to do was deliver more of the same based off the key blocks in place from the first game, but with a bit of a next-gen flair to help the game grow beyond its predecessor. And to be fair, Insomniac certainly delivered on this front. Spider-Man 2 is without a doubt a big step up from its predecessor when it comes to the scope and scale of the world and set pieces. Many set pieces act as a straight-up flex of the capabilities of next-gen hardware, and playing both Spider-Man games back-to-back, you definitely do feel that. It is just a bigger and bolder game in every way. Some of it lands, some of it doesn't. Now, since I made my After the Hype video on this game at the end of 2023, I've seen a lot of negativity spawning out of this game online. I've had comments on my last Spider-Man 2 video over the past year that have said the game is complete trash. And I just never really understood why. But we live in a time where MJ having a Giga Chad jawline completely undoes everything good about the game for some reason. Like, don't get me wrong, I poked fun at the way MJ looks in this game too. Like, if MJ has a better jawline than you and that's enough to make you hate the game, I think you've got bigger things to worry about, to be honest. Like, does she look weird? Yeah. Is it a downgrade over the first game? Yeah. Does it impact the game? No. There are a million other things you could be mad at regarding this game's flaws, and this seems to be the main go-to for people, which I just find kind of weird. So part of revisiting this game 1 year later, I just wanted to see if this game was just aging like milk, or the game is just, I don't know, another victim of the culture war, and it seems like it's a fair bit of the latter, unfortunately. But to be honest, I couldn't care less about that stuff. I just care if the game is good. And returning to New York 1 year on from the game's launch, I'd say whilst undoubtedly being a flawed game with some contrived and inconsistent story moments, this game is still a load of fun. The world of these Spider-Man games has always been one of the coolest aspects of it. Now, it's not the most in-depth and interactive open world we've ever seen by any stretch of the imagination, but it does feel alive. Taking a real-world location and bringing it into the video game world is just cool. Like that guy that found his apartment in a Spider-Man game. That's awesome. Now, Spider-Man 2 expanded on the open world compared to the first game and Miles Morales. Not only do you have Manhattan, but you've also got Brooklyn and Queens. Now, to be honest, whilst this does make the open world feel larger and more expansive, the bulk of the game is still pretty much set in Manhattan, retreading the same ground of the previous games, which is completely fine. Whilst the addition of Brooklyn and Queens is cool, don't get me wrong, it feels like a simple expansion more than anything. The lack of skyscrapers means that traversal in these areas simply isn't as fun. Swinging around a small suburb just isn't the same as swinging through a skyscraper-filled Manhattan. This isn't necessarily the game's fault, it's just a personal preference. Because I think Insomniac would have come under heavy criticism if they didn't expand the map, and given that this is a real-world location, you're pretty limited on your expansion, so it's kind of hard to blame them for the expanded areas of the map being a little dull compared to Manhattan. What this did achieve though was this sense of the Spider-Man feeling overwhelmed with the struggles of New York. This game is immersive and it puts you in the seat of what it feels like to be Spider-Man, and because of the sheer size of this open world, it can be a little daunting to put yourself in the mind of these characters and think just how much is out there. I also love the way the world adapts with the story. At the beginning of the game, you have the massive set piece with Sandman, and in most games, you kind of just expect things to go back to normal after a massive set piece, but no. The streets are still filled with sand for quite a while following this. It's a small detail, but one I definitely appreciate. Now, much like the first Spider-Man, when shit hits the fan, the city transforms. You had the G-Serum and villains running riot over the city, and in this game you have the symbiotes spread across the city, forcing people off the streets and New York halting to a standstill. It really helps with the world just feeling more alive and in tune with what's going on with the story, and makes it way more immersive. Now, in a recent video where I covered Spider-Man 2018 6 years later, check it out if you haven't already, I did say in that video that the open world feels very Ubisoft-alike, in the sense that it's an incredible looking open world, but it's filled with, at times, pretty senseless activities and collectibles. But the game's concept allows you to forgive the open world game design because swinging around the city is simply 10 times more fun than riding a horse or driving a car like you'd see in a Ubisoft open world game. So despite sharing similarities with a dated, tiresome open world design, these Spider-Man games kind of get away with it. Spider-Man 2 is no different. Scattered across the world, you have various collectibles, hunter blinds and bases, puzzles and challenges, and your reward at the end for completing them is something as simple as an unfulfilling phone call with a character in the game saying thank you. Or you could also get a bunch of really cool suits. You can get some really cool Easter eggs. You can even get a boss fight. You'll even find some nicer moments like the end of Flint Marko's Memories or the Howard side mission. There's also the EMF experiments spread around the world too, which to be honest, were kind of just boring to me and were a bit of a slog. Like, I'm playing as Spider-Man and I'm watering plants. Why? The photo ops are kind of just a small thing you do when you come across them and aren't really overly invasive as filler, but as the story progresses, some of the world events do evolve. You get symbiote nests throughout the map that are honestly pretty fun to do, as by the time you'll be doing them, you tend to have most things unlocked, which means you can kind of just go crazy with the best parts of the combat. Crimes also make a return as to be expected, but depending on the specific crime, it can be anything from common thugs, Raven's men, the Flame, symbiotes. Like, it does vary to keep them somewhat fresh, which is necessary because these things are almost endless and pop up all the time. Now, I know a lot of people don't like the crimes as they can be a little bit annoying. They've been in the previous games before, but I kind of like the idea of going to do something and then having that little internal thought process of, oh, should I go and help? Yeah, I probably should. I am Spider-Man after all. I don't know, I just feel like it helps with immersion. Now, a detail I love is that if you run into these random crimes as, say, Peter, sometimes Miles will be there helping you out too, and vice versa, and you can do the thing. This really does help sell that there are two Spider-Men patrolling New York when you have random encounters like this away from the story. Now, there's also the Flame side missions running alongside the main story, and to be honest, I pretty much lost interest with these the first time I played through the game. I always found it hard to buy Yuri's downfall into Wraith, and upon replay of the game 1 year on, I still feel the same way. And yes, for those of you wondering, I have played the DLC from the 2018 game that does flesh out her downfall, but I still just do not buy it, to be honest. But I guess by the end of the Flame missions, it's kind of worth it because you do get the Carnage reveal, which is no doubt setting up some form of DLC or the next game. Who knows at this point? Same goes for the Chameleon reveal, probably doing the same thing too. But essentially, you really just want to grind through side missions like these so you can unlock specific items. Mainly the suits. The suit variety in this game is simply 10 out of 10. And unlocking suits is basically the best reason to grind through all of the side content. You of course have an array of Peter specific suits, Miles specific suits, and variants of specific suits to alter color schemes. Like, it has to be said, Insomniac did a phenomenal job here with the suits in this game. Now, despite the incredible list of suits you could grind for, are all of these collectibles and side missions and challenges spread across the world worth doing in its entirety? Probably not. Some of them are, but the only reason I ever felt the urge to complete anything was because I'm a completionist at heart, and the way we traverse this open world is fun. Plus, as I said, the suits. Nothing was going to stop me until I unlocked the Spider-Man 3 Tobey Maguire suit. But traveling from one side of the map to the other for a Prowler challenge is something I'm happy to do, because the way this open world is designed for you to traverse, it's fun and it's satisfying. It's actually really weird to think about. Despite very similar design philosophies in terms of the open world, we absolutely flame Ubisoft games for filler content. But with these Insomniac Spider-Man games, we don't, because the way we traverse the world is just far superior. I think it is fair to say that this open world is very Ubisoft-like, but it's hiding behind the facade of Spider-Man, which in turn makes us a little more forgiving of the way Insomniac brought this open world to life. The gameplay is by far the biggest standout of Spider-Man 2. Having played the first game just before this, going from that to this was just a night and day difference despite the two games sharing core DNA. With the map expanding significantly, the gameplay and overall traversal mechanics obviously would have had to evolve too, otherwise traversal would have been pretty tedious. The web swinging mechanics are simply incredible. Web swinging and chaining movements together to gain momentum has never been as satisfying in any Spider-Man game as it is here. Whether it's web swinging after slingshotting yourself across the map, looping around to gain momentum, point launching off buildings, using special abilities to gain momentum in the air, or activating the web wings in tunnels spread throughout the map, it's simply the best traversal we've seen across all three games. And to be fair, this should be the case. This, after all, is a sequel, and sequels should expand on the original and innovate in creative and exciting new ways. And when it comes to web swinging and traversal mechanics, to act like Spider-Man 2 did any less than that, despite how you may feel about the rest of the game, would just be disingenuous. Look, this game undoubtedly has its flaws. Like, let's not beat around the bush here. It's got issues. But the core gameplay of traversing New York with Peter and Miles is a massive strength that even after 100%ing the game twice, I still really enjoy. It's kind of tough to appreciate just how much this game evolved the overall gameplay compared to Spider-Man PS4 and Miles Morales, because on the surface level, the game does seem very similar. Many swinging animations are the same, the core combat is basically identical, but it's only when you take a deep look through the skill trees and upgrades that you realize how much this game actually improves on the first in a gameplay sense. You kind of start Spider-Man 2 so Spider-Man feels like he did in the previous game, but as you progress through the story, you don't feel like you're retreading familiar ground with what you can do and what you can unlock. Your base build in this game is essentially where the other games left off, and now it's time to see what the new game has to offer. The symbiote powers are honestly one of the best parts of the entire game, and if you don't find it fun to go nuts with this thing, then I think you probably hate puppies too, because you're crazy. The power levels of our two Spider-Men were absolutely cranked through the roof in this game to help the gameplay feel like a massive upgrade on the original games. Miles is straight up OP with his Venom powers, and to match that, Peter gets the symbiote for most of the game. That way, one of the Spider-Men doesn't feel more powerful than the other. They're both ridiculously powerful, and it's clear Insomniac didn't want to have players favoring one Spider-Man over the other. They both get their time in the sun, and both are stupidly overpowered to the point where you wouldn't really be mad playing as either of them. Once you make a decent dent in the skill tree and upgrades, you really do feel like you're crazy overpowered, and it really does make the gameplay ridiculously fun. I think the base pillars of the combat of these Spider-Man games do get kind of boring after a while. Like, you smash square, you press circle to dodge, and then you smash square some more. But you can kind of do away with that when you get further into this game and use abilities in different ways to keep the combat fresh. I think the way you progress not just Peter's skill tree and Miles' skill tree, but one that upgrades both of them is also a nice touch. Even though this wasn't my first time playing the game, I was actively wanting to grind to upgrade these abilities because they are just so fun to use, which could make the game have a really satisfying grind to it. And I've got to say, the web grabber gadget, that thing is absolutely peak. I spammed that for the entire game. And the fact that you can only heal by progressing your focus meter, it basically promotes aggressive gameplay, which feeds into how this game hones in on the Spider-Man being OP, which promotes an aggressive playstyle. That I thoroughly enjoy. As for stealth, stealth can also play a big role in this game, and more often than not, the stealth is through the lens of MJ, because the damn MJ stealth missions are back. But it must be said, they are a massive improvement on the first game. Reason being, MJ is basically just John Wick now. So now she can just stealth around, kill hordes of trained hunters. Like, it's kind of better if you just don't think about it too much, to be honest. But the MJ sections, as I said, aren't as much of a slog as they were in the first game. They're more action-based with a little more freedom with what you can do. The Spider-Man stealth sections, I'm not going to lie, basically weren't even stealth because you can just go action-based and abandon stealth as you wish. And this game's combat is simply way too fun to walk across webs, tie up enemies that don't know how to look up. So I was often starting certain sections with stealth and then I'd go, yeah, nah, screw it. And I'd drop down on a swarm of enemies and let my overpowered Spider-Man abilities take them all down. Because that is just simply more fun to do. Even though Miles has a camouflage ability, I genuinely think I used it maybe twice in my entire playthrough because I don't want to be stealthy. I want to spam some fun as hell abilities and create some carnage. Because that is simply where this game's combat thrives. Speaking of thriving, the boss battles in this game are a massive improvement on the previous games. Now, are some of them a little drawn out and could probably be a little bit shorter? Definitely. But I'm not gonna lie, the boss battles in this game are a shitload of fun. The boss fight with the least amount of depth is the Venom vs. Kraven boss fight because you only really play as Venom in one mission, so you can't really do a whole lot with him, leaving the boss fight to feel like it lacks in depth mechanically. But the rest of the boss fights are exceptional. One that does stand out to me is the Martin Lee boss fight, because it's the same character as the first game where we also had boss fights with him. But here, it's just infinitely better and you can directly compare them and you realize how much of a difference there is. Some of the boss fights in this game are really challenging, but once you get a grip on the patterns, they can actually get pretty easy overall, so you tend to have to bump up the difficulty. I've got to say, I think they really did a great job in making boss fights just feel different from one another though. Most of them are a part of really cool set pieces that break up the monotony of what you'd expect from a boss fight. Whether it's flying around the place taking on Sandman, flying through the air beating the shit out of Venom with both Peter and Miles, chasing Lizard through Manhattan, or playing as two different Spider-Men against the same opponent. I think Insomniac nailed the boss fights in this game, to be honest, and they are a massive improvement. Overall, I think the gameplay of Spider-Man 2 is by far its strongest element. The upgrades to the web swinging mechanics are a welcome addition to aid in exploring a much bigger open world. The shackles-free combat approach that allows you to wreak havoc with overpowered abilities is still fun, even after completing the game multiple times. And the boss fights are also a significant improvement on most of the boss fights from the previous games. I think the gameplay overall, it really does carry this game in a big way. The story of Spider-Man 2, this one is a bit of a mixed bag. It's a story that deals with redemption, healing, and forgiveness. When I played through the story at launch, I was initially pretty happy with it. I thought it delivered a decent symbiote story with a whole heap of villains. I thought it delivered on the struggles of Peter and Miles balancing their dual lives, but it had a missed opportunity here and there, but nothing overly major. Now, playing the game again 1 year later, I was actually really surprised with how the story aged for me, and Spoiler alert, it didn't age very well. Now, it's by no means a bad story, but I think you guys know by now how much I can begin to pick stories apart in games I really get into. And that went down so well in my Last of Us Part 2 video. I only got about 300 death threats out of that video, so, you know, hell yeah. So now that the novelty had truly worn off with the story, I was going through it again, and I took on board many of the criticisms people have with the story and decided to see for myself if people were full of crap or the story of Spider-Man 2 was as good as I remembered. So, let's go through that story. Spider-Man 2 picks up where the Spider-Man PS4 ending pretty much left off, with Harry.
Strawberries.
As well as Norman and the symbiote. Harry is already in the tank in the first game, but here we get to see the conversation that took place beforehand. I've seen some people say that they think this might just be a nightmare sequence, and honestly, I'm not overly sure if it is. But what it does do is sets in place the symbiote storyline. We then catch up with Peter and Miles, who are both trying to deal with their dual lives as themselves and Spider-Man. Peter is a teacher, Miles is a student, but they're both ripped out of the classroom because Sandman is wreaking havoc on New York. Now, my favorite part about Spider-Man stories is how Peter's life suffers as a result of his greater responsibilities of being Spider-Man, and this was explored very well in the first game. It's also explored well in the Raimi trilogy and even Spider-Man No Way Home. And it's nice to see that they continue this through line here, and also give it to Miles as well. After defeating Sandman, he mentions to the Spider-Man that someone's going to be coming for them, and it's then we get our introduction to Kraven, a terminally ill hunter that is seeking an equal to essentially defeat him before his sickness can. I really like this idea, as you don't see villains very often that have the goal to die. More often than not, villains in media are seeking immortality, so I really appreciate this character for that alone, as it pretty much means that he doesn't act like normal villains do. Now, was this wasted by the end? Yes, but we'll get to that later. So Kraven, on his quest to find a worthy adversary, heads to New York, which is full of potential candidates. We then cut back to the aftermath of the Sandman situation. Peter loses his job for abandoning the students during a citywide emergency. We then find out that Peter and MJ are still together. She's working at the Daily Bugle under Jonah, but she's not really having a good time of it. We learn that Peter has taken over Aunt May's house, which has left him in crushing debt because she remortgaged the house to help with Feast, leaving Peter in a bad financial situation. It's here we finally get to see Harry, out of the tank, telling Peter and MJ what really happened. Harry then takes Peter to their old high school, and it's here the story lays all the groundwork for their friendship, which is absolutely vital for where this story goes. Now, I've seen a lot of people complain about this part in the story, saying it's a little bit boring, but without this, the emotional stakes between Peter and Harry later in the game would be significantly diminished. It's slow, sure, but it is important. We see a flashback of the night Harry found out his mother died of the same illness he's been dealing with in the present day, and it's here Harry brings up the Emily May Foundation. The two of them used to talk about healing the world, and because of Norman, Harry and Peter can now achieve their goal. We then see Miles trying to write a college essay which he is struggling with, and dismisses it without hesitation to fulfill his duties as Spider-Man to overlook a prison transfer at the Raft. It's here we learn that Martin Lee is being moved in this transfer. This is the first time Miles has really seen Martin Lee since he acquired powers, and this is the person that was responsible for the death of his father in the first game. Understandably, this sets Miles off, and from here on out, we see Miles have a strong internal struggle with how to handle this situation. He has to choose between revenge and letting go. Scorpion ends up escaping as Kraven is here and ready to break the prisoners out to begin his hunt. After everything cools down, Miles meets up with his uncle Aaron, and it's here we get to see more exploration of Miles' internal struggle with the idea that Martin Lee is free and what he should do about it. He's told to let it go and not let his lust for revenge consume him, and Miles is very resistant to this idea, which pretty much sets his arc in motion. We then get to see Peter and Harry's dream become a reality with the Foundation, but Peter is still a little on the fence because of his duties as Spider-Man, which I always found a little bit hard to believe. The story kind of pitches this idea as Peter needs to pick one or the other. At least that's the vibe I always got, which just doesn't seem right. Like, my guy's in crushing debt right now. Just taking this job would completely fix that. Like, Peter's been balancing a dual life for a long time, and this seems like the perfect opportunity to be able to do so. Yet the story pitches it in a way where it's one or the other, and I just never really understood that. We then get more insight into Miles' struggles with college applications, really throwing heavy burdens on him, and that's one thing this story does quite a lot. It really tries to throw the weight of everything onto Peter and Miles, which I think is good. We then get the information of why Kraven is in New York. We see that he's not forming a group of villains like it initially seems. The villains are instead his prey, which gives Peter a moral dilemma of having to save his own enemies. Kraven kills Scorpion, and it seems like Felicia is next. So instead of Peter dealing with her given their past, he sends Miles to help her escape Kraven. She uses an artifact to escape to Paris to help her girlfriend out of a situation that she is responsible for, which finally gives you a bit of insight to the fact that she's not always just out for herself. So although her appearance in this game is brief, we still get some good character work with her. But it's here that the story really starts to get moving. Miles meets Mysterio at Coney Island, which sets in motion a series of side quests. And here Miles meets Harry for the first time, as Peter, MJ, and Harry are also there just like old times. We find out that Tombstone is also there working, as it seems he has turned his life around. So that's two reformed villains we've seen now. We get a not so subtle hint that there is also much more going on with Harry than even he knows. We then get more on MJ's struggles at the Bugle, which sets up future conflict between her and Peter later in the story. Kraven's hunters then attack Coney Island to capture Tombstone. As chaos ensues, Harry's symbiote powers are revealed. This causes Harry to realize that Peter is Spider-Man, which just increases their bond. Now, alongside all of this, the Flame side missions progress along the story as well, and I already spoke about the Flame side missions earlier in the video, so I'm not really going to bore you again with it here. Peter then sets off to save Tombstone from Kraven's hunters and urges Harry to stay away, but he joins anyway. The mission ends up a success, but we start to see issues arise with the symbiote as it tries to latch onto Peter. We then cut back to Miles, where he expresses to his mother that he is struggling with the Martin Lee situation. And these are some of the moments in the story that I actually really like. I love Miles in these Insomniac games, and I think some of the story's best moments are the ones where it's just Miles and his mother talking things through. We then have a gameplay section as MJ, where she sets out to find Dr. Connors, who has also been taken by Kraven's hunters. We find out that Kraven has not only killed Scorpion, but he's also killed Vulture, and after finding Connors, Kraven makes his presence known and injects Connors to try and turn him into the lizard so he can begin his hunt. As this happens, Peter and Harry try to save MJ and Dr. Connors, and in the chaos, Peter is stabbed and essentially killed by Kraven. But the symbiote, following up on the scene with Harry earlier, makes its way onto Peter and seemingly brings him back. And it's here that we get one of the best moments of the entire game.
Oh, this feels good.
Now, despite how awesome this moment was, it's here on out that the story starts to get a little bit messy and a little bit unfocused. And most of my issues with the story stem from this point onward. Peter tries to work out a way that he can get the suit back on Harry, as without it, his sickness is slowly starting to creep its way back. So in order to find a way to get the suit off, he locks in on finding Dr. Connors to help, as Connors was the one who was helping Norman with the symbiote originally. Peter then finds his way into a party for Kraven's hunters, and it's here he finds out about Kraven's illness. Peter then sets out to find Kraven and the cure for Connors, and he eventually finds him. It's here Kraven realizes he has found his final hunt with Peter and the symbiote. Whilst workshopping a cure for Connors, Kraven's hunters track Peter there and destroy most of the Foundation. We then cross over to Miles, who, is still in this story, by the way. He kind of goes missing for a few hours. It's pretty weird. But here he is, and the writers try to force a wedge between the two Spider-Men here. Peter ignores Miles' calls, which aids into Miles falling into a revenge path toward Lee. Peter then goes to Connor's house to try and find him, and we start to see Peter really start to change because of the symbiote, It fuels his rage towards Craven for dragging Connors and his family into his hunt. And it's here that we get to see the huge set piece chasing Lizard across New York, and this is just phenomenal. Lizard eventually escapes, and we really start to see Peter's attitude deteriorate even further. But it's not just the player who sees it now, Miles sees it. Peter then also blames Lizard's escape on Miles toward MJ, putting the two at further odds, continuing to drive a wedge between them. After defeating Lizard and turning him back to Connors, we start to learn more about the symbiote, and that it's an alien that was found years ago, and it's more dangerous than Connors originally thought, and it must be destroyed. It's here we start to see Peter refer to the symbiote as us, which means the symbiote is really starting to take him over. That night, the symbiote just about completely takes Peter over, leading him to hunt down MJ. Amidst the chaos, Miles is captured by Craven to bait Peter into coming after him so Craven can resume his final hunt. Peter wakes up the next morning and doesn't even remember what he did the previous night. He visits Harry, who is really starting to deteriorate and desperately needs the suit back. But even if he could, Peter doesn't want to give it back. The color of his clothes change and he's pretty much going full Bully Maguire at this point. We also get follow-up on MJ's struggles at the Bugle, and she feeds into Jonah's negative obsession with Spider-Man and posts a truthful article about Spider-Man, which sets Peter off further. But the next scene is one that really set me off, and one that really made me quite annoyed at what this story ended up doing. Norman is at his wit's end trying to find a new cure for Harry, and when Peter walks in the room, this happens.
Watching you two grow up together. You're like a son to me. I am so proud of the man you've become.
Now, the first time I played through the story, I was like, okay, that's a little bit corny, it's a little bit forced, but whatever, I can let it go. Upon replay though, this was one of the moments that really stood out to me as just a contrived moment in the writing. Across both games, you never see anything that really warrants Norman saying something like this to Peter, even in a vulnerable moment. But the cherry on top of why this is such a forced moment is Harry is of course listening in on the conversation. It's trying to drive a wedge between Harry and Peter. But the thing is, it's not necessary because the previous scene established that this wedge is already in place. I don't know, I just feel like this moment didn't need to exist and was just a forced and unearned moment to create even more conflict between Pete and Harry that again, didn't need to exist. It was already there. Now, whilst all this is happening, Miles has still been captured by Craven. He eventually comes face to face with Lee. Lee then infiltrates his mind, and it's here where Miles doesn't forgive Lee, but is starting to open up to the idea of letting go of his past. And in doing so, he helps Lee escape whilst he remains captured by Craven, but he tells Lee to find Spider-Man. Lee does this and then tells Peter that he should be proud of Miles, really kicking into motion Lee's redemption arc. Peter then sets off to find Miles, and the bait works as Craven is there waiting for him. Thinking that Craven has found his equal, they fight and Peter defeats him. But Miles intervenes before Peter can kill him, which leads us into a boss fight between Miles and Peter. You start to understand why Peter wants to keep the suit, as he feels that if he had the suit, he could have perhaps saved May. Because the suit, according to him, just makes him a better Spider-Man. But there's also the clear corruption that the suit is putting on him. Miles helps tap into the Peter deep within, and in a defying moment, Peter rips the suit off, and his Bully Maguire arc comes to an end. We then get a really nice moment between Peter and Miles, and I will say I really do love the dynamic these two characters share, and this is probably one of the better moments in the game that showcases that. Peter then takes the symbiote to Oscorp so Dr. Connors can detain it, but he runs into Harry, and when Peter says that they need to destroy the symbiote, Harry in a fit of rage causes a conflict between the two of them, causing the symbiote canister to break, and then it latches itself onto Harry. It's here, all the way into this story, that we finally get to see Venom. Now, I know a lot of people don't like that Harry is Venom in this game, and I do get it, but I'm totally fine with it personally. I know a lot of people wanted Eddie Brock to come to the story and be Venom, but honestly, it didn't really faze me either way. I think the look and voice of Venom was absolutely amazing, but I definitely do have my issues on how he is used toward the end of the story. But the fact that Harry was Venom instead of Eddie Brock really didn't faze me. After laying waste to Oscorp playing as Venom, which is absolutely amazing, we cross paths with Kraven and encounter the easiest boss fight ever. Kraven is severely outmatched by Venom and he gets his wish. He is defeated in combat and dies a warrior's death instead of letting his very human sickness take him. Now, as cool as this moment is, it also signifies one of the story's biggest problems. It's that the entire story feels unfocused because the main antagonist with solid motives is killed halfway through the story. And then the secondary antagonist, who has very vague motives, then takes up the rest of the story, leaving the story structure to just become unfocused and strange. In the final third of this story, something feels like it's been cut out. I don't know what it is, I don't know where it's supposed to be, but something is missing. So Venom preys off the fact that Harry wants to heal the world, so he just spreads symbiote strands across New York and corrupts people. It's just, I don't know, it's just a weak motive for such an iconic villain. I almost think Venom actually hurts this story. I think the game would have been better off if Kraven was just the main villain, and that was it. No Venom. That could be a hot take on my end. I honestly have no idea, but I'm pretty much willing to die on that hill. This game would have been better if Kraven was the main villain and Venom was out of it completely. And also, the way that Peter finds out about Kraven's death is just weird. The primary protagonist and primary antagonist aren't even close to one another when the primary antagonist's death comes. Like, Peter finds out Kraven died over a phone call from Miles. That is just weird. Harry then goes across New York, turning people into symbiotes, and eventually he finds MJ and lures Peter to him. He wants Peter with him to, quote, heal the world. We get the iconic "We are Venom" line, which is great, I'm not gonna lie. And then Harry transforms MJ into Scream and we engage in a boss fight where all of the frustrations MJ has about Peter comes out in twisted ways. The dialogue in this boss fight is a little poor, to be honest, but the boss fight itself is a lot of fun. After Peter defeats Scream, MJ comes to the realization that despite Jonah's affirmation of the hit piece MJ put out on Spider-Man earlier, she realizes what's really important and she quits the Bugle. We then learn from Dr. Connors that some of the symbiote may still be within Peter because he had the suit on for too long, and this ends up being true. So in order to save Peter, Martin Lee and Miles go into his mind to try and destroy the remaining symbiote, and in turn, Lee gives up his powers to do so. But before it happens, we see Miles' arc come full circle, and whilst not forgiving Lee, he is willing to let it go. So they team up, the plan then works, and Lee loses his powers, and it gains Peter's ability to use the anti-venom suit. Now, let's be brutally honest here. The only reason the anti-venom suit exists is so we can keep using the symbiote powers. It would have been annoying to have symbiote powers for so long where you were super overpowered and in turns Miles also became super overpowered. Then to strip that away would have just meant that there's no point playing as Peter, as Miles is clearly the way more powerful Spider-Man. So this was a clear workaround for that, and to be honest, I'm not mad about it. It's fun as hell. But regardless, Lee's redemption is now complete, and whilst this shift in mentality is certainly sudden going into this game, I do like how they actually handled Martin Lee's redemption by the end of this game. We then find out that Venom is after the meteorite. Connors lets Peter know that there's no way to save Harry, as the symbiote and him have bonded perfectly, and the only way to kill Venom is to kill Harry. Before Peter and Miles head for a final confrontation with Venom, we see both of them come together and have another great moment of vulnerability. It's just a shame it's partially ruined by this absolutely god-awful suit Miles has on at this point in the story. Like, Insomniac, I know that Adidas, or Adidas, I know the Americans will correct me, I know they probably paid you a bag, but was it really worth it? Look at this suit, man. This is absolutely terrible. Miles then heads off to save Hailey from symbiotes and even asks her on a date, finally doing something for himself in his personal life. And whilst that's happening, Peter finds Venom again, and Venom continues to try and convince Peter to join him. But he gets away, and the trio then formulate a plan to stop Venom and free the city once and for all. They plan to lure Venom away from the meteorite with Peter, whilst Miles and MJ take it to the particle accelerator referenced a few times in the story, and hopefully destroy it whilst they try to disconnect the symbiote from Harry. After Peter and Venom fight, Venom realizes he has fallen for the trap and heads to the Foundation to stop MJ and Miles, but incapacitates Peter in the process. So now, Miles has to fight Venom, and here we see more of Harry's jealousy of Miles regarding taking Peter from him, obviously exacerbated by the symbiote. Peter and Miles then team up to fight Venom in the climax of the story. They get the symbiote off him long enough for Harry to tell them to kill him because the symbiote simply won't stop. They then destroy the meteor, and Peter is forced to kill Harry to stop Venom. It was at this moment in the story where I thought, alright, we're hitting Spider-Man themes on the head here. Spider-Man wins, Venom is defeated, but Peter Parker loses because Harry dies. This is what I expect from a great Spider-Man story. But then Miles successfully revives Harry. Now, I understand why Miles tries this, but the fact the writers felt the need to bring Harry back just really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. They're trying to set up Norman's Green Goblin arc, which would have been much easier to buy if Harry died. Like, at the surface level, from Norman's point of view, both Spider-Men managed to destroy the symbiote and get Harry out of the situation alive. And for some reason, that is enough motivation to set off his Green Goblin arc. I just think thematically with Spider-Man stories, it would have made more sense for Harry to die here, and for Norman's Goblin arc, it would have also made more sense for Harry to die here. Instead, they opt to keep him alive, but in a coma. It seems like the writers just wanted to keep Harry alive to keep options open for the third game. I really didn't like this the first time I played the game, and I hated it even more the second time I played. But to wrap up the story, MJ starts a podcast called The New Normal. Peter runs the Emily May Foundation out of his garage, and in doing so tells Miles that he's stepping away from being Spider-Man for a while. To which Miles is more than happy to take up the mantle, until the inevitable sequel anyway. In the mid-credit scene, we see Norman go and talk to Otto at the raft. Norman is already hell-bent on finding out everything about the Spider-Man, and we of course know that Otto knows Peter is Spider-Man, which leaves us on a cliffhanger of an unlikely duo teaming up. And then the post-credit scene shows us who Miles' mother has been dating, which gives us the reveal of Cindy, aka Silk, once again setting up future events for the next game. Yes, the entire final 10 minutes of this game is basically planting seeds for the next installment. But that is basically Spider-Man 2's story. It certainly has its moments, but there are a lot of problems. It lacks focus, it tried to do too much, and still feels like there's a lot missing. But again, it does have some great moments, but I ultimately think Kraven and Venom were wasted. But when the game actually slowed down and gave us down moments with Peter and Miles, I think it was great. But overall, the story, it's just a bit of a mixed bag. So to bring this one all together, Spider-Man 2 is a great game, but it could have been better. The cracks in the open world design show from time to time. The gameplay is simply outstanding with unbelievably good traversal and combat mechanics. And the story, as I said, is a bit of a mixed bag and probably the weakest aspect of the game. Yet it still has some great moments that do salvage it for me. But what did you think of Spider-Man 2? Let me know down in the comments below. We have some banger videos coming up. We've got God of War Ragnarok, Red Dead Redemption, Undead Nightmare. We got a lot going on. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, follow me on Instagram, join the Discord as well. All of those links will be in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, take care.